Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 10. Tally wandered into her dorm after class, feeling Abigail's eyes on her immediately. The room was empty, save Abigail, who had been just lounging on her bed. Raelle was probably still on her way back from training. "Have fun with your girlfriend today." Tally wasn't looking at Abigail, but you could hear the smirk in her voice regardless. Tally flushed at her sister's teasing question, still avoiding her gaze as she walked over to her desk, pretending to sort through her notes. "Not that it's any of your business, but yes." Abigail snorted loudly at that. "Baby, with those marks on your neck, I think it's everybody's business." Tally lost all interest in her notes, spinning around suddenly to stare at Abigail, who was struggling not to laugh. "What?" Abigail thinned her lips, muffling her laughter as she gestured to her own neck. "She may not be ready to come out, but she sure as shit doesn't want anyone thinking you're available." Tally gaped briefly at Abigail before turning and bolting into the bathroom. The door bounced wildly off of the wall behind her, almost swinging shut into place again as Tally found herself staring in the mirror at her reflection. Her reflection stared back at her in shock as her eyes landed on the deep purple mark that was on her neck, a stark contrast to her pale skin. Her eyes widened slightly, and she reached up to tuck down the neck of her shirt to get a better look at it, revealing two more marks as she did so, one further down her neck, and another on her collarbone. The door was nudged open, and Abigail squeezed herself into the small bathroom behind Tally, wrapping her arms around Tally's stomach, resting her chin on Tally's shoulder. She had a supremely smug look on her face. "Now I see why you were late the other day. Hickeys are always a valid excuse." Tally's cheeks reddened slightly as she ran a fingertip over the marks on her neck. "Can we not call them that?" She would die before she ever willingly admitted this to Abigail, but the word hickey seemed too immature, too crass, to tie to someone such as Sarah. Abigail scoffed a puff of air into Tally's ear. "Oh, I'm sorry. Would love marks work better for you?" she asked sarcastically, pushing off of Tally as she did. "Seriously, though, props to your girl. You should have seen Adil's neck last week." She winked as she left the bathroom. Tally whirled around to stare at Abigail's retreating form. "Is that why he's always wearing that scarf?" Abigail's cackle was the only answer she needed. Tally rushed out of the bathroom after her. "Abigail, wait!" Abigail didn't say anything, but she gave Tally a questioning look as she flopped herself back onto her bed. "I think," Tally gulped nervously, "I think we're going to have sex tonight." Her words were barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, we? I don't want to have sex with you, Tally." Abigail's smirk was barely visible as she rolled over, facing the wall. "Abs!" Tally said, voice verging on hysterics. She ran over and flopped herself onto Abigail's bed with her. Abigail let out a grunt as Tally's body collided lightly with hers. "What's the big deal, Tal? It's just sex." She turned back over, Tally's pleading brown eyes meeting her. "It's a big deal because I've only ever had sex with one person before, and never with a woman." Tally's eyes were begging. Abigail tried not to laugh at her sister's desperation. It reminded her of how Tally had acted about Garrett in the days leading up to Beltane, if not a touch more dramatic. "If you're looking for tips on lesbian sex, I think you would have better luck with Riel." Tally flushed, turning scarlet. "I'm not looking for tips." "Then what are you asking, babe?" Abigail shifted so she was laying on her back, looking up at Tally, who was sitting up next to her. "I don't know what I'm asking," Tally whined, dropping her head into Abigail's stomach. "I just have, zero experience. What if I'm bad at it?" Her voice was muffled as she spoke into Abigail's stomach. Abigail squirmed under Tally, pushing her sister back off of her stomach. "Don't do that. That tickles." Tally reeled back slightly from Abigail's push, rocking back and forth on the bed. "Sorry." "And Tal," Abigail sighed. "If you're worried about being bad or nervous about sex with a woman in general, then just be truthful with her. Tell her it's your first time." She reached up and poked Tally in the stomach. Tally quickly swatting her hands away. "If she cares about you, then it won't matter." "Are you sure?" Tally didn't look convinced. Abigail rolled her eyes affectionately. "Look who you're talking to. Expert of all things lesbian sex right here." "You're an ass," Tally retorted, earning a laugh from Abigail. There was a knock and a loud throat clear at the door that had both cadets scrambling to attention, immediately recognizing who that throat clear had belonged to. Anacostia was standing in the doorway, flanked by a soldier that was just out of sight. She glanced quickly around the room. "Where's Collar?" "She should be coming back from witch bomb training," Abigail answered. Anacostia leaned her head down to the soldier standing next to her. "Go find Collar. Tell her to meet her unit in the general's office." "My mother wants to speak to us." Abigail sounded confused. "What's going on?" Anacostia turned her attention back to the girls, eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on Tally, who was looking at her expectantly. She stared at Tally, not quite meeting her eyes, an unreadable expression on her face. It took Tally a few moments to realize that Anacostia was staring at the, as Abigail had so eloquently put it, love marks that were littering her neck. Her hand itched up to reach up and adjust her shirt to cover at least one of them, but she knew it would only call attention to them further. Anacostia met Tally's eyes, an almost knowing smirk on her face. Tally's face burned, looking away, and Anacostia finally seemed to acknowledge that Abigail had spoken, arching an eyebrow at her. "That is for the general to tell you. You're both to go to her office immediately. Collar will meet you there." She nodded at the girls, giving them a small smile before turning and leaving. Tally and Abigail turned to look at each other. "Why would your mother be summoning us before dinner has even started? We still have training to do in an hour." Abigail shrugged. "I'm just as lost as you. She may be my mom, but that doesn't mean I'm exactly privy to every single one of her decisions." She glanced briefly at Tally's neck and let out a peal of laughter. "I can't believe my mom is gonna see all your hickeys." Tally's eyes bulged, and her hand flew up to her neck to cover the marks. "Oh my goddess," she whispered, horrified. I can't let your mom see these. Abigail scoffed again at that. Why not? She knows we have sex, Tally. It's not exactly a secret. We did all participate in Beltane, remember? She didn't even wait for an answer before heading for the door, zipping her coat up as she went. That's different. Tally followed Abigail out of the door, hand still on her neck. You just don't let moms know that you're having sex. That's not something you do. Should have thought about that before you let your girl mark up your neck like that. Abigail threw a cocky grin over her shoulder. Tally sputtered in response, and she had to run to keep up with Abigail, who was hightailing it towards her mother's office. When they arrived, Raelle was leaning casually up against the wall outside Petra's office, looking almost bored. Her eyes lit up when she saw her sisters running towards her, but they quickly narrowed in confusion when she saw Tally, who was still holding her hand up to her neck. Tally, is there something wrong with your neck? Concern was evident in both her voice and her eyes. Abigail turned back to look at Tally and rolled her eyes. Oh, for goddess sake! She reached up and grabbed Tally's hand, yanking it away from her neck as Tally yelped. Raelle's eyes widened, and she let out a choked laugh, her hand immediately flying up to cover her mouth. Holy shit! I think you need to borrow Adil's scarf. Abigail clicked her tongue. He's gonna need that for a few more days. Tally ignored both her sisters' comments, lurching forward to grab at Raelle's shoulders. Can you fix this? She begged. Please. Oh, honey. Raelle tilted her head, still laughing. I don't know if those exactly count as injuries. Raelle, Tally fixed Raelle with a stare. I do not want to go in there and talk to Petra with these all over my neck. All right, fine, Raelle relented. She peeled Tally's arms off of her shoulders, reaching for Tally's neck. She had no more than begun to speak the first words of a mantra, cold fingers closing around Tally's neck, when the door to Petra's office flung open. The words died on Raelle's lips as all three girls turned to look at Petra, who was standing in the doorway. Raelle's hands were still around Tally's neck. An almost comically confused look crossed Petra's face as she took in the sight before her. Raelle with her hands around Tally's neck, Tally looking at her like a deer caught in the headlights, and Abigail behind them both, covering a smile with her hand. What is happening out here? Nothing, ma'am, Raelle answered innocently, quickly removing her hands from Tally's neck. Tally let out a very undignified squeak. Petra's gaze followed Raelle's hands at first, but they eventually flicked back up to Tally's neck. She didn't say anything as she took in the sight of the love marks on Tally's neck, but she raised her eyebrows and, much like her daughter had earlier, thinned her lips and looked down, almost as if she were trying to hold back a laugh. Tally's face burned, and Raelle shrugged helplessly at her. Sorry, she mouthed, apologetically. Petra quickly regained her composure, and she straightened up. Come inside, girls, quickly. She turned on her heel, not even waiting for a response. Not wanting to leave her waiting, the three girls walked into the room, following Petra. Abigail entered first, stopping short at the sight of something only she could see at first. Tally, who hadn't been expecting the abrupt stop, promptly collided into Abigail, sending her stumbling forward. The hell, guys? Raelle's voice sounded from behind them both, and she shoved by them, forcing her way into the room. She stepped around her sisters, faltering when her eyes landed on what had stopped Abigail in her tracks. Girls, I'm sure I don't need to. Petra turned around and barely resisted the urge to roll her eyes at the three cadets who were standing in her doorway, gawking. Oh, for goddess sake, Raelle, shut the door, Petra snapped at her. Rael jumped at the sound of Petra's voice, and she quickly turned around, rushing to shut the door behind her, stuttering out an apology. "Nice to see you again, Red." Nicta's teasing tone seemed to snap all three girls out of her reverie. "Still got those dimples, I see." Her eyes raked up and down Tally's form, from where she was slouched comfortably in an armchair in the corner of Petra's office. The corner of her mouth twitched. "Among other things?" Rael snorted, quickly attempting to cover it up with a cough. Nicta's mouth twitched again as she looked at Rael in amusement. "What are you doing here?" Abigail's tone was accusatory. Nicta turned her gaze to Abigail. She was flicking the lighter repeatedly in her hand. "She's here to help, Abigail," Petra said, leveling her with a look that read, "Play nice." Abigail frowned at her mother, but she didn't argue. She straightened and stood to attention. "What did you want to see us about?" Petra leaned back against her desk, crossing her arms. "As you are all aware, Nicta has been helping the army. You." Petra paused briefly at Nicta's interruption, turning to look at the other woman with the furrowed brow. "I'm sorry?" "I'm not helping the army," Nicta clarified. "I'm helping you." "But I am the general of the army," Petra reminded her. Nicta just shrugged her shoulders, going back to occasionally flicking the lighter in her hands. Petra eyed her uncertainly for a second, before turning back to address the girls who were exchanging glances among themselves. "Regardless of Nicta's intentions, she has been a great ally to both myself and the army as a whole." She saw Nicta grimace out of the corner of her eye, but she ignored it. "It is only because of Nicta and her agents that we now know of where the Camarille's base of operations lies, where they create the witch plague." Abigail and Tally's eyes widened almost in unison, as Rael sucked in a breath. "What?" Rael was the only one to speak, looking back and forth between Nicta and Petra. "How do you know this?" "I have my ways," Nicta said nonchalantly. "She had agents under cover in the Camarilla," Petra said, Nicta shooting her an indignant look of exasperation behind her back. "What does this have to do with us?" Tally spoke for the first time since spotting Nicta. Petra's lips thinned, and she suddenly looked uncertain of herself. "Nicta will be leading an attack on the base, tonight. Her, a dozen of her agents, and you three." All three girls began to speak at once. "Why is she leading the attack? She's not even army." "Tonight? Like, tonight? Wait, why are we even going?" All three girls began to speak louder to be heard over each other, until Petra held up a hand, effectively silencing them all. She leveled the three girls with a stare. "Nicta is leading the attack as it is only because of her information and the sacrifices of her agents that we know where this place is, let alone that it even exists. You will be assisting her because I still want the army in on this mission, and you three are the only ones I can trust with this, to work with the spree and with—" she chanced a glance over her shoulder at Nicta, "and with her." The three girls glanced at each other once again, before Tally nervously spoke up. "And when are we leaving?" "Immediately." Tally choked on seemingly nothing. "Immediately?" Petra frowned at her. "Is that a problem?" Tally's eyes were wide, and she frantically shook her head. "No, ma'am. No problem at all." "Where is it?" Abigail asked. "Roanoke, Virginia." Nicta stood up from the chair she had been lounging in, and flicked the lighter once more, holding it up to her face. The four other women in the room all watched her with varying emotions, as Nicta's face burned away, and was replaced with the visage of a stranger. "I'll go get my agents ready," she spoke to Petra, who nodded, before turning to the three cadets. "And I will see you there. Nicta's smirk still shone through the disguise. Later tonight. She brushed past the three girls, turning around to Petra one last time, before she opened the door, giving the general a mock salute. "Catch you later, Pet." She was gone with a wink, leaving Telly and Riel to gawk at each other, and both bellwether women with a frown on their face. "Telly, I swear to the goddess, if you don't stop shaking your leg, I'm going to throw you out of the bed," Riel said in annoyance. Telly bit her lip as she clenched her shaking hands together, forcing her leg to stop bouncing. "Sorry. Are you really that nervous?" Riel put her hand on her shoulder, the weight a comfort, even through all the combat gear that they both wore. "I mean, yeah, obviously," Telly said, "but it's just that—" She stopped speaking, unsure of how to tell her sisters that she was in a panic over the thought of Sarah. Sarah, who would be waiting for her to show up tonight, only for Telly to never appear. What would she think? Would she think Telly had freaked out again? Or worse, would she think that Telly didn't want to show up? Telly let out a shaky breath. The thought of Sarah thinking that Telly didn't want to be with her, in any sense, made Telly sick to her stomach. Nothing could be further from the truth. She hoped Sarah wouldn't be mad. "They were gonna have sex tonight," Abigail stage whispered, and Telly was eternally grateful that it was just her and her two sisters in the bed. Rael whipped her head back and forth between Telly and Abigail so suddenly that Telly was afraid she would get whiplash. "You are?" "We were going to," Telly corrected, her gut twisting. I think so. But it doesn't matter now anyway, because I'm not going to be there when she expects me to be, and she's going to think I stood her up." Telly tried to force out a laugh, but it died in her throat. "Oh hey, come on, Tal." Rael nudged Telly's knee with her own. "It'll be okay. You can make it up to her when we get back." "Yeah, and you can have desperate, oh thank goddess you're alive sex," Abigail said, a teasing tone to her voice. Telly crinkled her eyebrows together. "What? Is that a thing?" "Oh yeah," Riel shook her head. "Trust us. It's a thing." The headset that was resting around Abigail's neck crackled to life, and she quickly put it on, eyebrows furrowing, as she listened to whatever the pilot was telling her from the cockpit. She nodded determinedly, and took the headset off, a sick feeling sinking into Telly's stomach. "Time to salve up, with a unit?" Abigail grinned. "Time to drop." Sarah heard the door to her safe house open from where she stood in the kitchen, and smiled to herself. It was a bit earlier than she had been expecting Telly, but she certainly wasn't going to complain about getting to spend more time with her than she had originally anticipated. "Hi, darling," Sarah spoke, as she rounded the corner. "I didn't think you would be here so—" "Oh." She stopped, dead in her tracks, reeling back slightly as her eyes landed on not Telly, but Anacostia, standing in her living room with her eyebrows raised. "Anacostia, what are you doing here?" "Well, hello, darling." Anacostia's eyes flashed mischievously. "Expecting someone else?" Sarah closed her eyes briefly, willing to stop the blood she felt rushing to her cheeks. "Clearly," she managed to bite out, opening her eyes as she spoke. "So, I take it, you and Craven are—" "Yes." "I see." Anacostia nodded slowly, before sighing heavily, and leaning back against one of the couches. "Well, that just made this a lot harder." Sarah was instantly alarmed. "What does that mean? Did something happen with Telly?" "No, nothing happened," Anacostia said quickly. She got sent out on a mission this evening. They left about an hour ago. I came as soon as I could." "What?" Sarah hadn't intended to, but she shouted the words, causing both herself and Anacostia to flinch. "How is that even possible?" "I will tell you, But you need to promise me that you won't get angry. Sarah was dangerously close to that point already. I will make no such promise. Anacostia rolled her eyes. Worth a shot, she muttered, bracing herself for Sarah's upcoming reaction to what she had to tell her. You are aware that the army, Petra in particular, has been working with Nicte and the Spree to hunt down the Camarilla, yes? Sarah's eyes narrowed. Yes. Well, thanks to Nicte, Petra found out about the Camarilla's base, the one where they make the witch plague. Sarah's eyes flashed at that, but she remained silent, letting Anacostia continue to speak. Nicte is leading a group of Spree to attack the base tonight, and Petra sent the Bellwether unit along to assist. Whatever reaction Anacostia had been expecting from Sarah, it wasn't the one she got. Sarah stared at her, almost dumbfounded, for a few moments, until she suddenly walked past Anacostia, heading for the door. Sarah! Anacostia reached out and grabbed Sarah's arms, halting her progress. What are you doing? Sarah's eyes flashed again, the anger that Anacostia had been expecting finally rearing its head. To get Petra Bellwether to explain exactly why she sent 3 cadets on a mission headed by Nicte Batan, she hissed out. They were the only ones that could be trusted to work with her. You know that. And she thinks Nicte can be trusted to work with them in return. Sarah was shouting again, but Anacostia kept a hold on her arm, unflinching. Sarah. She wouldn't have sent her own daughter if she didn't think Nicte was trustworthy, Anacostia said softly. Sarah faltered a bit at that, but the anger was still there in her eyes. Let me go. You can't go after them, Sarah. You know that. The only thing I know, Anacostia, is that she sent Telly on a mission with people who hate the army, to fight people who hate witches. The anger suddenly evaporated from Sarah's eyes, leaving only desperation behind. What if something happens to her? Anacostia had yet to let go of Sarah's arm, fearing the woman would take off the moment she did. Telly is a strong and capable fighter, plus she has her unit by her side. You need to trust her and her unit. It's not Telly I don't trust. It's the people who are supposed to be working with her on this mission. Sarah attempted to turn away and make for the door again, but Anacostia held on fast. Sarah, where are you going? Sarah rounded on Anacostia, a torrent of emotions raging through her eyes. Pain, worry, fear, and again, anger. I can't just sit down here while the woman I love walks so freely into the hands of my enemy. Anacostia's jaw slackened, her grip loosening on Sarah's arm in surprise. You love her? She knew Sarah had harbored feelings for Tally. That much was obvious after their dinner together several weeks ago, and when she had noticed the love bites scattered across Tally's neck earlier that day, she had a sneaking suspicion who had put them there. But to hear Sarah say so bluntly that she was in love with Tally, Anacostia had not been expecting such a thing. Sarah's chest was rising and falling rapidly, and her eyes darted around nervously, like she hadn't quite realized what she had said until now. Yes, the word was a whisper, a harsh contrast to the shouting she had been doing up until now. Her voice returned to normal, if not a bit shaky. Yes, she repeated, which is why you will do nothing. Anacostia grabbed Sarah by the shoulders. She is on a mission with Nicte Batan, she stressed. Have you forgotten that she still thinks you're dead? If you go rushing after them to protect Tally, not only will it show Nicte and the rest of the spree that you're alive, but it will show them and everyone else that Tally is important to you, that she can be used against you. Anacostia's eyes were flickering all over Sarah's face. desperate for her to understand what she was saying. You will just be putting her in more danger. Not to mention the fact that the spree agents there may decide to try to kill you while they're at it. This whole mission will implode. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, and she clenched her jaw, taking in a sharp breath through her nose. I can't lose her, Anacostia. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I know, Anacostia whispered softly, but right now the best thing for you to do for her is to remain hidden. I will have her sent to you the moment she returns, okay? Sarah nodded, opening her eyes. Keep me updated. There was a lump in her throat, but whether she wanted to cry from fear or frustration, she wasn't sure. Anacostia nodded, letting go of Sarah's shoulders. I'll be back as soon as I know something. She smiled reassuringly at Sarah, before rushing out of the room. Stepping out into the cool evening air, Anacostia looked up as a bitter wind blew by. Thunderheads were forming overhead despite the late season, and the wind was already picking up speed, bending the trees and sending leaves skittering across the ground. Lightning flashed unnaturally in the sky. Down in the safe house, alone, Sarah picked up a pillow from the couch and screamed into it.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.